What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Patrick, aka Addicted to Combat, back for another week of Best Bets and Props, where I go over all of my betting action for this weekend's UFC card, which is a big pay-per-view down in Miami, Florida, UFC 287, Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2, middleweight championship on the line. We also have the co-main event at welterweight, Gilbert Burns versus Miami's own George Masvidal. So an awesome fight card, 13 fights altogether, and honestly, you guys, it's been like a really challenging betting card to be confident in a lot of good spots, especially from a money line perspective. I'm not in love with a lot of them, but I do have two money lines that I've bet. I do have one money line that I parlayed with something for next week, which I'll go over, and I do have a few props as well. And we killed it last time. You know, UFC San Antonio 2 weeks ago went just under 12 units of profit. All the bets were hitting, all the props were hitting. So we'll try to do it again, not overextend ourselves, but I'm liking a lot more of the time props than I am the actual money line. So without further ado, hit the like, hit the subscribe. For any further details on my bets or predictions I don't touch on in this video, I try to make this one brief. Check out my full card prediction from Monday morning. And also check out the live stream I did with Couch Warrior Podcast and Lou Bet Ya. So without further ado, let's break into the first money line of the night. My first money line at UFC 287 is not until the main card. Kicking off the main card, I bet 2.5 units at minus 220 on Raul Rosas Jr. to defeat Christian Rodriguez. Very confident in Rosas Jr. here, even though he's only 18 years old and only making his second walk to the UFC cage. This is actually Christian Rodriguez's only third time at the UFC level. He's only been in this weight class now twice. So lost his first bout to Jonathan Pierce on short notice, up a weight class. And then Christian Rodriguez just came back and got a victory over Joshua Weems, who was on short notice. So Raul Rosas Jr. made his debut back in December and choked out Jay Perrin, who was a pretty well-rounded fighter, but mostly a boxer, mostly a striker, but nonetheless still a good test for his first walk to the cage. Didn't take more than a couple minutes for Rosas Jr. to get the fight to the mat and choke out his opponent. So I expect more of that here. If this stays striking, Rosas Jr.'s striking is definitely a huge question mark, and probably not on the level of advanced as Christian Rodriguez. That's his strength. Rodriguez, very good submission defense, as we saw against Jonathan Pierce in his debut, but he can get taken down. You know, he got taken down 6 times in that 3-round fight, and he got taken down twice against Joshua Weems in his last fight. Managed to end up getting an anaconda choke himself and counter one of those takedowns, but I wouldn't imagine he wants to play that game with Rosas Jr. So I'm taking the money line of Rosas Jr., who I just think is going to be physically strong and fast enough to close the distance and nullify the striking difference here. Probably get a submission, but it could be just like a control time based win for Rosas Jr. as well. So I'm just taking his money line, 2.5 units at minus 220 on Rosas Jr. Another bantamweight bet up next. I'm betting on Rob Font as an underdog to defeat Adrian Yanez. Plus 160, the underdog price on Rob Font. I put 1.5 units on him to defeat the young up-and-comer Adrian Yanez, who's going to be about, 5 or 6 years younger, I believe, than Rob Font. But Font still, I think, has some wins left in the UFC. He's just been facing very high-level competition, and that's what he brings to this matchup, is not only what I think is probably a cardio edge, the output in the striking edge, probably a high-level, resume edge, and I think even maybe a technical striking edge as well, especially defensively. That all goes in the favor of Rob Font, who has also been very durable as well. We've seen him hurt in a lot of spots, but never put out that often. So Adrian Yanez, the better finisher here, the younger man, more able to improve fight to fight. He does have some jiu-jitsu skills that we just haven't really seen a whole lot of so far. In fact, the only times we've seen Yanez lose in his professional career so far, he's been out-grappled. And Adrian Yanez can be very hittable, too, and sometimes drop round 1 and have to work his way back into the fight in round 2. We saw that against Davy Grant. There was the split decision result, probably the closest fight he's had. And also against Randy Costa in round 1. Had to weather the storm of Costa. And then, of course, if you can get Costa out of round 1, you can defeat him quite easily. So Yanez, 5-0 in the UFC, finished 4 of those bouts so far, including his last fight against Tony Kelly. But Rob Font, man, he's this is going to be his first 3-round fight in a while, and I think that is going to be a big deciding factor in why I think he should win this fight. The high level, the high level competition, the better defensive boxing, in my opinion, in this fight, the durability, and the fact that he can push a pace and probably outstrike. He's outstruck both of his previous opponents he's lost to, Marlon Vera and Jose Aldo. It's just because he got hurt down the stretch of those fights. Two dangerous strikers in those opponents. Yanez could fall in that category. He could rise to the occasion, show he's improved, but I got to go with the experience of Rob Font here. So plus 160 in a fight that I think should be at worst a pick-em price tag. Sign me up for the underdog, 1.5 units on him. And this is the final money line I have, but this is part of a parlay with a fighter on next week's card. I've got Gilbert Burns, 2 units on him, and I parlayed him with next week's fighter, Chris Gutierrez, who I think really has a great chance at winning that fight. So the combined parlay odds, 2 units invested, is minus 123 this week. We just have to get through the Gilbert Burns defeating George Masvidal part of that parlay. And Burns is, neither of these two men are the youngest of welterweights. I think Burns is like 34, 35 years old, mostly a high-level grappler. But George Masvidal has the experience and a lot more fight miles on him. He's been a pro for a long, long time, 38 years old now. And George Masvidal, he had that nice 3-fight winning streak. When you look back at that, there wasn't a whole lot of cage time involved. A second round knockout over Darren Till, a 5-round knockout over Ben Askren, and then we did see a lot of high level striking against Nate Diaz, who I think everybody can agree is a little bit washed up. But that was at the end of 2019, the last time we saw George Masvidal get a victory in the UFC. Since then, dominated in a 5-round bout against Kamaru Usman, dominated again and then knocked out by Kamaru Usman. Finally, his durability had been cracked there for Masvidal. And then we also just saw him get out-wrestled by Colby Covington. And I think it's going to be mostly a grappling-based victory for Gilbert Burns once again. Masvidal does lose to that type of opponent quite often. Even Damian Maia, who's a BJJ, kind of a one-trick grappler at that point in his career, was able to give Masvidal trouble. Even going back as far as Benson Henderson was able to make the fight very close and beat George Masvidal that way just based on the grappling. So there's a lot of spots like that where George Masvidal has the more powerful moments, the more polished striking. He's a very good striker, but if he faces grappling threats, he can get stalemated on the cage, forced to play defense, and then he has a lot of split decisions because of that. But this should be more dominant. Gilbert Burns coming off of the round 1 dominating arm triangle submission victory over Neil Magny, which was incredibly impressive. I think very highly of Neil Magny. So the strong wrestling combined with the strong BJJ game, I think Burns can actually finish this fight inside the distance. Maybe like a round 2 submission I could see happening here, but if nothing else, just a control-based decision and just holding his own in the striking. If this does stay striking, if for some reason Burns cannot get this fight to the mat or at least hold Masvidal against the cage, he's at risk of getting knocked out in this fight. We've seen Burns have sort of questionable durability, getting knocked out by Dan Hooker, who's a 145er, and then also getting knocked out by Kamaru Usman, who's a much more stronger striker, but there's jabs and things like that ending the fight and wobbling Gilbert Burns. So Masvidal could pull something out. Maybe the Miami atmosphere will be just increase the motivation now that Leon Edwards is also holding the championship belt. Maybe that's added motivation, but at 38, I don't think that these deficiencies in this game are going to get much better. So it could be Gilbert Burns. Like I said, 2 units on him in a parlay with next week's fighter, Chris Gutierrez, minus 123 odds. Moving on to the prop side of things, I do have a prop on Gerald Meerschaert to defeat Joe Pyfer. I do like GM3 in this matchup. Joe Pyfer, very talented. We still have a lot of question marks as to what his potential is, especially down the stretch of a fight. He's only been to decision 1 time, coming off of a round 1 debut knockout over Alan Amedovski, who then after that ended up going 0-4 in the UFC. So they gave Joe Pyfer quite a layup of an opponent for a debut spot. He did as expected and got the round 1 knockout, but even though he is pretty well-rounded, Joe Pyfer has mostly relied on his striking, but he does a lot of good work on the ground too. His wrestling seems strong, his jiu-jitsu very good as well. But Gerald Meerschaert, that's where he shines, is in being well-rounded as well. I mean, he's a guy who usually endures punishment early on and can work his way into a fight as it goes, and that's something we have not seen from Joe Pyfer yet. So Pyfer being 10-2 as a professional so far, having 1 UFC fight. Gerald Meerschaert has more UFC appearances than total fights for Joe Pyfer by quite a bit. We're talking about a 10-7 record for Gerald Meerschaert, who's only lost to pretty much the best of the best and only been finished by ranked fighters at the middleweight division. Meerschaert has got a plethora of submission offense, submission attacks in his arsenal, and a lot of round 3 finishes. I want to say we've got 4 round 3 finishes for Gerald Meerschaert in his career in the UFC so far, and I expect he could probably do this again. So what I like in this fight is just taking Gerald Meerschaert inside the distance, since he has never once won a decision in the UFC. So I don't expect that to happen. I don't expect this fight to see the scorecards. I could see Joe Pyfer early, like he's done in all of his finishes, are under 1.5 rounds. Or I could see Gerald Meerschaert in rounds 2 or rounds 3. So give me GM3. I put 1 unit on him inside the distance at plus 225. And then I took his round 2 sub and round 3 subs, a quarter unit apiece at plus 850 in round 2 sub and plus 1400 for round 3 sub, respectively. So a total of 1.5 units invested in GM3 to finish the fight, and most specifically by submission in rounds 2 or rounds 3. It's almost like the Nate Landwehr play that we cashed on last week. And speaking of plays that we cashed on last week, this is also a very similar strategy here. This is what I consider to be one of the closest matchups on the entire card, and the bookies do agree with it. Chris Curtis moved from a slight favorite now to a slight underdog. Kelvin Gastelum switched as well. Now he's the slight favorite here. But if you got in on Kelvin Gastelum as an underdog price, looking at you, Cody, from Blood Money MMA Bets, that was a very good spot. I think he wins this fight, but I'm not confident enough to bet him as a favorite here just because he's lost like 5 of his last 6 fights, albeit to very high-level opponents, very tough fights, 5-round fights, many of them. But I like the fight goes to decision in this spot. Minus 190 for the fight to see the judges' scorecards. I put 1.5 units on that because Kelvin Gastelum never been knocked out, and that's really where Chris Curtis shines. Is he could be even losing a fight, getting outpointed until he finds a way to end his opponent and put their lights out. But likewise, Chris Curtis has never been, he's been knocked out 1 time. So not in the UFC, but 1 time in his long career against, I think it was Ray Cooper, knocked him out. So, and that was in the PFL a few years back. I don't see that happening from either man here. I think that Kelvin Gastelum will get some wrestling going. Maybe this will be a stalemate on the cage, and it'll be a battle between, once again, it'll be a battle between Chris Curtis's bigger moments, Kelvin Gastelum's more consistent striking output, and control time possibly if he gets the wrestling going, which I think will give him the edge in this fight. So the judges will be, probably very confused as to like, okay, do I count the more significant strikes and the clinch control time of Kelvin Gastelum or the bigger moments that I saw turn the head around of Kelvin Gastelum from Chris Curtis? So the fight ends in split decision. I put a quarter unit on that, plus 450. And, of course, the obligatory each guy by split decision to win. 0.1 units on Chris to win by split, plus 1,000. And 0.1 units for Gastelum to win by split is plus 700. So as long as it goes to split, as long as there's at least one confused judge, we'll cash on that and turn, a few units into at least a couple, like a few fractions of a unit into at least a couple units, right? So that'll be, if it goes to split, we'll get a unit on just the fight ends in split. And then either guy, Chris Curtis could turn a tenth of a unit, $10 into 100. That'd be nice. So we did that last week with Trevin Giles and Preston Parsons. We'll see if we can do it again. But what we'll cover all of this is if we can get the fight to just go to decision in general. That'll be 1.5 units at minus 190 for both of these durable fighters. Like I said, I think Kelvin Gastelum should do enough to get the victory. Why I'm not playing his money line is losing 5 of your last 6. I need some plus money on you if you've got sort of a past history like that. So I think Kelvin Gastelum has the tools, but I don't really want to go against Chris Curtis as an underdog either. And finally, making it to the main event, I do have 3 time props on the main event. I've got with Alex Pereira taking on Israel Adesanya in the rematch, 4 to 5 months in the making. Alex Pereira, now the reigning defending champion, only 7-1 as his professional record. Israel Adesanya, what is he, something like 23-2 or something like that? Let me check his record real fast. Just a vast difference in their records here. 23 wins, 2 losses for the former champion and one of the best middleweights in UFC history, Israel Adesanya, who is now a combined between kickboxing and mixed martial arts, 0-3 against his rival, his nemesis, Alex Pereira, the Brazilian. So, the first fight, very close. A lot closer upon rewatching it than I remembered. I do slightly lean towards Alex Pereira to win this fight. I just think it's going to be close. And again, bigger moments from Alex Pereira, who's a very technical kickboxer as well and much more physically imposing. And he's going to play the bully and stalk down Adesanya, who's going to be forced to counter-strike and had his moments. I mean, Adesanya almost ended the fight at the end of round 1 last time. Alex Pereira eventually did that in round 5. So I think it plays out close. I think both guys will be very tentative early. Neither man wants to make the first mistake. You see that dynamic in a lot of rematches for the title. So the over 2.5, I have 2 units on that at minus 225. I got that on Bovada Sportsbook. I think that price is still out there and maybe even better on some other books. The over 3.5 at minus 145, I put 1 unit on. And the over 4.5, just going 2.5 minutes into round 5 plus 100. I put a half of a unit on that. So the over 2.5, over 3.5, and over 4.5. Cascading the price where I'm the most confident at least reaches halfway through round 3, and then it goes from there halfway through round 4, halfway through round 5. And, Alex Pereira, his record is a lot of finishes because he made a very fast rise to the top, got this grudge match against Adesanya due to their history, and he did beat some good opponents like Sean Strickland and things like that, but all the previous finishes I can't really take into consideration. But what I can is Adesanya, who's been very prolific with going to the judges' scorecards over his career. He's had 14 UFC fights, 9 of them have seen the scorecards, and out of his 10 scheduled 5-round bouts, 8 of them have seen the score. 8 of them have at least seen round 5, including his last fight. So I really do think he's going to be elusive like he was last time. There's a chance he gets caught by Pereira's powerful striking, but I think we're going to see a lot more of the same as last fight, where we see Adesanya trying to clinch up or counter-strike effectively. When he gets cornered, he'll clinch. When he's got room to laterally move, he'll escape and land his mark. And I think it'll be, once again, the bigger moments of Pereira potentially ending the fight at some point versus Adesanya's consistent output. But I do think we see Pereira get his hand raised, as he'll probably just end up defining the rounds with his damage. So there you have it, you guys. All of my bets for this weekend's UFC card. UFC 287, Pereira versus Adesanya 2 for the middleweight championship, taking place down in Miami, Florida. And we've got that awesome co-main event with Florida's own George Masvidal trying to solidify his stake in the roster at this point after going on a 3-fight losing streak. So a lot of intriguing matchups. There's some good young versus old matchups on this card that we talked about, and a lot of potential hype trains that will either keep on cruising down the tracks or get derailed on Saturday. So it was a trickier betting card. I'm just trying to dodge some landmines with one favorite, one underdog, one parlay, and a few props scattered there as well. And we'll try to replicate the success from UFC San Antonio. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Drop a comment below with how you think the main event is going to go and what betting spots you've got to make money on this weekend's card. So I'll talk to you guys very soon. Enjoy the fights.